Okay, good evening, everybody. I'm going to call to order this special meeting of the Perrysburg Board of Education this Wednesday, March 1st of 2023. Mr. Drew, your roll call, please.
Ms. Larimer, Mrs. Eubank.
Here.
Dr. Reffert.
Here.
Mr. Pullman.
Here.
Mr. Bennington.
Here. And Ms. Larimer is on her way. So I ask everyone to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We're going to start with our safety briefing. Perrysburg Schools welcomes you to the Commodore Building, and we thank you for attending tonight's Board of Education meeting. We care about the safety of our students, staff, families, and guests. Please note that there are exits on both sides of the east and west sides of the cafeteria. In case of an emergency, an AED is located just outside the cafeteria doors. You are located at 140 East Indiana Avenue. Thank you for joining us tonight and supporting Perrysburg Schools. So first order of business, I'm looking for a motion to adopt the proposed agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Pullman and Dr. Reffert. And roll call, please.
Mr. Pullman.
Yes.
Dr. Reffert.
Yes.
Mrs. Eubank.
Yes.
Mr. Bennington.
Yes, motion carries. So next item on the agenda. We got a lot of guests tonight to give us a facility committee report. So Mr. Hosser, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, well, thank you very much. And this is a very exciting evening, and we have guests from the committee that has been working for the last year, and presenters from that committee who will be making revealing the work that the committee has done, and certainly their thoughts about the future for Perrysburg schools. So with that, we'd like to jump into the presentation if you're ready.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
Okay. We have the presentation here for the committee as they put it together. So first, I would just like to take a moment to recognize the presenters this evening. So we have a list of the presenters that are working on the committee, and they'll each come up when their time, when they're going to be presenting. And they will be sharing a little bit about themselves and their connection to the schools. But we're certainly grateful for the time and effort the entire committee has put into this, and certainly the presenters who've gone that extra distance and said, yes, I'm willing to participate and present. So we have that today. We also have some other representatives from the committee that are here who aren't presenting. So if those individuals, if those individuals could stand, and maybe all the representatives that are speaking this evening from the committee, if you wouldn't mind standing so everybody could recognize you. So we wanted to begin the presentation. I'll say a few words to kind of kick things off before I hand it off to Dan. But we do have just a quick look back. And the community and the board has had a vested interest in the facilities and the growth in our buildings here in Perrysburg. So this committee is really working on and standing on the shoulders of past work that has been done in the district. So going back to 2012, when the board charged the community committee to come up with, what do we do about growth? At that time, we had our elementaries. We're adding portables each year. 3 of the 4 elementaries were at capacity, and 3 of the buildings were in portables, actually. And also we had the junior high that was relying heavily on portable classrooms as well. So the board said in 2012, let's get a committee together, let's begin to work on some solutions. And that committee brought forth a recommendation, which led to the board placing a ballot issue on for Hall Prairie, which we're grateful was successful. Since that time in 2018, we felt it necessary to begin to look at our existing buildings and look at some of the issues surrounding the deferred maintenance and just relying on aging buildings like we do in this district. And so in 2018, there was a review of the facilities and a detailed report on the conditions and everything. And then in 2021, we began to work on enrollment projections and continuing the work that had been done in 2018. So we're here now poised, really building off of the 2018 work, the 2021 work, which was part of our strategic plan, and we're moving forward with some recommendations here that the committee has put together. The issues that brought us all together, these are the things that cause board members and administrators to stay awake at night, to reach for the Tylenol when you begin to think about these things. So I wanted just to highlight those. So the one issue that caused the board to trigger this group to be put together was the growth of student population. And you'll hear more about that in detail tonight. Aging facilities, at the same time we're having a growing population, we're also dealing with buildings that are older, that are requiring more and more attention and funds to be diverted from the general fund, which goes to help fund for new teachers in a growing enrollment. Also, we understand that going from building to building across the district, there is a disparity that exists between the conditions of the learning environment between students. Our staff does a wonderful job of maintaining our buildings and keeping them running and operating in a very welcoming way. But buildings that were built in the 1950s versus buildings that were built in the 1970s and buildings that were built in 2017, there is that disparity that exists, and that was something the committee knew about going into this study, and something that the board said we want to pay attention to that. We're beginning to rely more and more on portables, and we're seeing us getting back into the portables at the elementary level again, even though the entire 5th grade has been stripped out of those. And we're also, for the first time, into portables at Perrysburg High School. And that's something that happened here in the last year. And then the elementary boundaries have created kind of this patchwork quilt of attendance areas. And that creates challenges for families. It's also very inefficient when we're trying to find an open spot in an existing building, busing students past sometimes 2 elementaries to go to their elementary school because of growth. So we'll hear more about that. But it's those issues that really have led us to be here today to form this group back in October of actually 2021 that said we need to begin to have this conversation, and these are the things that this group tackled. The things that we heard during this time was, we're getting more and more students into the districts. We have older buildings. We have 4 buildings that are between 40 and 60. And we know that the community doesn't want to pay any more in taxes than they need to. Boundaries, the portables, and then we open it up to the committee to come in and begin to help out. So I'll turn it over to Dan, who will pick up here. So Dan, just kick us off, and thank you again.
Thanks, Tom. So my name is Dan Doyle, moved into the district in 2019. Oldest daughter is a Perrysburg High School graduate. Youngest daughter is currently a high school freshman at Perrysburg High School. So who is the committee and what did we do? So the Facilities Master Planning Committee is made up of 61 members. Out of that 61, 43 are community members, 18 are employees, 27 are parent guardians of a current student like myself. So the Facility Masters Planning Committee is then broken up into 3 subcommittees: the Student Population Growth and Facility Use Subcommittee, Athletic STEM Special Education, and the Fiscal Analysis Subcommittee. The Student Population Growth Subcommittee's main purpose was to look at what is the current situation of Perrysburg's student population and where is it planning on growing into the future up to the year 2040. Which you'll see 2040 is a key theme throughout this presentation. Then the Athletic STEM, Special Education, Fine Arts is looking at how is the space used today? Is there enough space? What should the future look like in order to support that type of student involvement? Then the Fiscal Analysis Subcommittee is looking at how should we pay for this? How much is it going to cost? What's the best use of funds for any type of proposal, and asking those type of questions. So here's a listing of the members, just for your background, of the 61 people who devoted a lot of their time throughout the past year, as Mr. Hostler said. So this wasn't a single meeting. It wasn't just a couple meetings. Obviously, throughout the last year, We met numerous times. These meetings were well attended by the majority of the 61 individuals, or if it was a subcommittee meeting, by the majority of those individuals on that subcommittee. And for example, here's a picture of one of the meetings to show how well they were attended. And in addition to the meetings, we also did tours. We toured every facility within the district on March 7th and March 9th. We also asked tons of questions during those meetings, how the space was used, asked questions about the deferred maintenance, how's that impacting the school. In addition, we toured the Shoreland School within Washington Local School District, which is a new 800-student building. We asked numerous questions there as well of the Washington Local School District administration. Some of the comments were, it doesn't feel like a building for 800 students. Another great school, well done. Like how the furniture changed with each grade level. And the other resounding comment was everyone felt safe within the building, even though it was so large. But again, it didn't feel large for those that toured the building. So the other thing we want to impress on you is we put literally everything on the table. We also asked, what is the cost and impact of doing nothing? And you'll see that again throughout the presentation. You know, we looked at, should the goal be to eliminate long-term use of the trailers, portables? Should we continue to use Hall Prairie as 5, 6 grades? Should we change it within? I mean, we asked literally anything you could think of. Someone of the 61 members asked that question. And the other thing we want to impress, we are not a rubber stamp committee. I think you can see that through the independence of the members, the time devoted, the ability to ask questions. Things were changing by the minute throughout, and what culminated into this presentation today. So some of the committee input, we also asked surveys, and one of the resounding themes was we had 100% of a yes response of the 61 committee members to say portables are not the long-term solution. They should be eliminated, which I think is a resounding answer. Another one, you know, we looked at Hall Prairie should remain 5, 6. We asked, you know, these questions. We also considered all the options on the table. Should we have 4 or 5, 600 or less schools? Should we go towards 800? And again, we considered everything, and again, considered the financial impact of every decision we did. So we also did committee workshops and selection exercise. We had, again, this is just impressing on you, everything was on the table. We considered various options. It wasn't just one option was presented and it was a yes, no vote on that. We had the opportunity to select different things, and then what was the majority vote of the 61 members.
Good evening. My name is Allison Reynolds Gogol, and I grew up here in Perrysburg, where I attended kindergarten through senior year, as did my husband. And we decided to return to Perrysburg to raise our family. So now we have 2 boys, and our oldest is a 1st grader at Toth. I have taught history for 13 years at a public school outside of the district. And this past fall, I was brought in part-time as a testing coordinator for the teaching and learning department here at Perrysburg. So those categories that we discussed that the committee members fall into, I check many of those boxes. And I've enjoyed my time on this committee, learning plenty. So looking at our 2 main goals moving forward into this mission that we shared. We wanted to be sure that we were responding to the challenges as they evolve in our community. And we wanted to do so setting our eyes on a broader scope of time, a broader span of time. And the number that we most agreed with was the one that you see here, 2040. The other point that we wanted to bear in mind throughout this process, of course, was safety. This is paramount today, tomorrow, and every day between now and that number right there and beyond. So I know Tom mentioned this just a few moments ago. The high school just saw its first portable installed within this past year. And later on in the presentation, you're going to hear about projections that show just how many students we might imagine from our community using these portables full-time, so to speak, not as a temporary measure, but as a constant. And as diverse as our committee was, this was actually one thing that we agreed on from the start. We had 100% agreement that this was not okay, that portables are not suitable for our students in our community or any community as a long-term measure. And I think you'll see also that financially, later in the presentation, that you'll see that it's also not suitable for us as taxpayers. As an alumni of this school, this is not an okay option for me. As an educator, this is not okay. Portables are not going to cut it. As a taxpayer, I don't want to see these growing in number in the green spaces around our beautiful buildings. And as a parent, when I think about safety ongoing into the future, this is not acceptable.
Thank you. Good evening, I'm Brooke Price, Assistant Superintendent, and I'm going to talk a little bit about future growth. So this slide right here shows our current school boundaries. And you can see there's pockets of some of the different colors within those boundaries because of what Tom alluded to before, where we're growing so quickly that some elementary students have to be routed to a different elementary than may make sense location-wise because of the capacity of those buildings. So you can see there's some pockets of some different color within that range. You can also see how big that range is. And additionally, that there is no school located in some of the areas within those boundaries. So this slide here, those smaller yellow circles are our existing buildings, and the larger colored circles are the 1 mile radiuses around those buildings. So you can see where the buildings are currently located. There's quite a bit of overlap within that 1 mile radius, and again, to kind of highlight where there is no school within the boundaries, this kind of highlights that. All of this information is also uploaded to board docs, so you'd be able to go back to this presentation and see any of these slides that you might want to reference. So this is our projected growth at a 2% rate. And you can see that trend line starting back from 2002 through now, where we might be in 2040 at that 2% rate. That trend line, if that continues, that's quite a high number. So again, that 2% growth is a reality. That's what's been happening. And so this kind of highlights where we would be looking out to 2040. So this is one of Tom's favorite slides. This is the snowball slide. So this slide illustrates the class size of students in their kindergarten year and then what that class size is now. So you can see the current seniors, for example, when they were in kindergarten, there were 302 students in that kindergarten class. Now as 12th graders, there's 429. So we've picked up 129 students along the way throughout their educational career for that grade band. And you can see that happens year after year. So this is really a good slide that kind of illustrates how growth happens within Perrysburg. We pick up kids along the way throughout their education. So to put it in perspective, we've grown by 19% in the past decade, since 2012. So to put this in perspective, the junior high currently serves around 831 students. The entire Ottawa Hills School District serves 1,039. So we've essentially almost added the Ottawa Hills School District within the past decade to our district. Additionally, when we look across the region, the number of new students that we have here is equal to the combined number of new students for TPS, Sylvania, Ottawa Hills, and Anthony Wayne. So we're the only those are the only other districts that grew from 2014 to 21, but we are certainly outpacing others in our area. So this is kind of a before and after, so which has not been that long. So the above picture is a picture of what it looked like out by HPI not that many years ago, and then the below picture you can see all the houses that have popped up within that time span. They were having their day of awesome, so that's what the fun stuff is out there on the HPI lawn. So we're going to turn it over to aging facilities and deferred maintenance.
I'm going to jump in here real quick to go back to those last two slides. My name is Jackie Durr, and I am a STEM teacher at the junior high. I taught 12 years at the high school, and then moved down to the junior high, and I've been there for 13. And I was blessed to be able to, I was asked to start the STEM program, and it's quite the program throughout our whole district. A couple of things that, as I was on this committee, you know, you hear that, yes, we're growing. And I'm thinking, yeah, we are. But it doesn't really hit you until you think back. So when I first started teaching, our current junior high was the high school with 4 grade levels in it. And I remember going out in the hallways and it's like, okay, bumper cars. Well, then we got the new high school. So I moved to the new high school, and you see that you've got some room. You can spread your wings. You can grow. Then I go back to the junior high, and it became 6, 7, and 8. And it was like, at first, it was like, okay, this is working, but soon you start playing bumper cars again. And so then 6th graders move into HPI, and it becomes 2 grade levels. Now, what makes me really think is when I first started teaching 25 years ago, that building held 4 grade levels. And now here we are, 2 grade levels, and we're playing bumper cars again. And then the last thing I want to say is the 2 pictures that were on there, when we did the building tours, and again, this was eye-opening, so I encourage you, take a ride around the district. Because again, I was like, yep, we're growing, yep, we're growing. And I remember being on the bus, riding from the high school to HPI, and I see this huge farm field. And somebody points out, and they said, that is all clear now, but there's already been 300 lots sold. And I'm thinking, 300 lots on that huge property is nothing compared to what it's going to end up being. And I'm like, okay, well, what's the average number of students we get from each house? Even if it's 1, that's 300 kids. 2, it's 600. So it was very eye-opening for me. So if you ever question, are we growing, take a drive, because that proved it to me. So thank you.
Good evening. I'm Dave Serra with the Collaborative. We're an architecture and planning firm that's been involved with the district for a number of years. I've been personally involved since 2016, really with Hall Prairie, and have kind of been working with the district through some of the earlier master plans Tom mentioned back to 2018, 2021, and into today. So I'm going to talk a little bit this evening about your facilities, about the age of the facilities, the deferred maintenance. I know we've talked about this in the past, but want to kind of refresh that, because really, anytime you start a plan and a master plan, you really want to know kind of what you have today and what condition those facilities are in today. So just kind of taking an initial look at your facilities, I think Tom mentioned it earlier, you know, you've got multiple buildings. 3 of your academic buildings are more than 50 years old. This building that we're in today is 92 years old. And then playing off that theme of the 2040, if you look out to year 2040, that age just continues to climb, and you really start to see how some of those buildings really age. So with that, we really wanted to take a look at the deferred maintenance of each one of the buildings to see what kind of shape they're in structurally, mechanically, electrically, to get an understanding of, if these buildings are going to last till 2040, what kind of improvements and dollars might you need to invest into those facilities to make sure they're there in 2040. We did, the district hired a firm out of Cleveland in 2018. Then Design was an independent third-party firm to do these initial assessments then. This was the second time that the district had these assessments back in 2011. The district reached out to OFCC and had similar facility assessments done. We started over here in 2018, then Design came in, toured all of your facilities. We wanted to use OFCC guidelines as a baseline, and I think we've been doing that throughout the whole process. That's the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission would typically come into your district, bring a third party. They've got all the metrics, all of the costing, that a lot of these assessments are based off of statewide. So it's a really good benchmark for your schools as well. These assessments, and I won't go through every line item in each one of your schools, but there was an assessment done. We've been escalating those dollars since, initially they were done in 2018. We've been pushing those dollars forward with escalation. So what you see there are costs based off 2022. So that's kind of that orange category. But then we took a little bit of a deeper dive and tried to break out those dollars because they are significant. And as you see, as we kind of flip school to school, they grow in some cases. So we really wanted to say, what do you really need as a district, and what are maybe some of the requirements that OFCC might recommend you do, or if you took their dollars, you would have to do. But I think that's still a question moving forward, whether the district wants to approve that. So we just said, what's realistic, and what could be some items that need immediate attention, and then maybe some secondary items that you could maybe delay for a little bit longer. So just using Fort Meigs as an initial example, and I think you'll see a little bit of a consistent theme just due to the age. Again, a lot of these are getting to the end of their life with mechanical systems, electrical systems, roofing. You've got PI dollars that you spend on each one of these schools this year. It's not a very large amount at all, but it goes to the schools, and those dollars have been used wisely. I know in previous presentations, back in 2011, when OFCC came through and did that assessments, they use a 66% guideline where if it costs you more than 66% to renovate than build new, they'll suggest you take those schools down and start over. When we did this assessment in 2018, back in 2011, you had 2 schools that were above that 66%. Which would suggest at that time those schools potentially should have come down. Using the PI dollars and investing them wisely, when we got to 2018, you had no schools that were in that 66% or above range. So I think it just goes to the district and how they've been able to spend those dollars wisely over the years to improve those buildings and get those out of that condition they were in 2011. So each one of these schools, again, we'll click through these a little quickly. If you've got any questions, I could definitely address those. But again, kind of broke them up into both categories. We are showing total project costs. So this just isn't construction costs. This is total project costs. We added soft costs in for fees, permitting, contingencies, items like that, and broke those out in each school. And again, once you take a closer look, you'll see the common themes of roofing, mechanical, electrical, a lot of finishes. And again, some of the strategies we use where you don't really need to replace every finish in all of the buildings, as OFCC would suggest. We took, maybe there's about a 50-50% where you address the academic spaces and maybe don't address some of the other administrative spaces. So I'll get to the last chart, which kind of gives you a summary. So looking where you are in 2022 dollars, total, it was about $60 million worth of just deferred maintenance. That's not building anything new. That's not putting an addition onto anything. That's purely bringing up all of your systems, roofing, mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems, finishes, kind of up to a current standard. Breaking that down into that immediate and secondary category, that was about $45 million in kind of immediate need and about 14 into secondary need. We went back and looked in 2018, just to give you a sense of kind of what escalation has done in only that kind of 3 or 4 year period. That deferred maintenance cost has gone up almost $10 million. So back in 2018, it was about $51 million. today's dollars, we're looking at about 60.
I had one question. What's life safety? I see that as a line item in all the,
Sure. That deals with making sure the doors are wide enough, that you've got emergency lighting, anything that would deal with not necessarily like bullet-resistant glazing or anything of that. It's more of a building code, making sure your travel distances from the building to exits are wide enough, long enough, your doors wide enough, things like that. Make sure you have some type of either battery backup lighting or emergency power lighting. So there's probably 10 or 12 items in that category.
thank you.
Good evening. My name is Heidi Kodum. I am married to a Perrysburg High School alum, and we have two daughters in the district. One is a freshman at the high school, and the other a sixth grader at HPI. So I'm going to touch a little bit on the cost of doing nothing that Dan highlighted earlier. As he said, we considered lots of different options as we met as a committee, and this was definitely one that we focused on. So as the public school system, as you know, Perrysburg schools cannot turn away students, regardless of how full our buildings are, the conditions of those buildings. If a student is registered on the roster, we have to provide services for them. As you can imagine, as we are over capacity, as we are strained with staffing, that provides a very tough challenge that we're faced with to continue to provide that high quality education that we want to provide and we're accustomed to here in this district. So looking at a couple of different ways, how could we manage buildings that are beyond capacity and still maintain that high level of education that we are wanting? One of the things we looked at is splitting the school day into different shifts. A morning shift, an afternoon shift. We didn't get too deep into the weeds on this, but we recognized that right away the offerings for academic options would definitely be reduced. The students would be in class, less instructional time than they currently are. And of course, we would have to have more staffing in order to accommodate that overall longer school day from the time the first shift starts to the time the second shift ends. Of course, the obvious, adding portable classrooms is for sure an option. I want to point out when we're talking at portables here, we're talking about portable buildings, not necessarily the number of portable classrooms. So today within the district, we have about 22 classrooms, but that's only, they are contained within 12 buildings. So within the district, we have 12 portable buildings. That number would grow by 40, so we'd have 52 portable buildings throughout the district on every campus within the district by 2040. Today, we currently have 2 buildings that do not have portables. That's Toth and HPI. The other thing that the portables only addresses is the traditional classroom space growth. It does not address the needs for additional cafeteria space, enlarging playgrounds for recess, the specialized classrooms for music and art and gym and STEM and all of those extra things that require special types of offerings within the classroom that's not addressed by just adding the portable classrooms. And again, as Allison hit, I think, very well earlier, security continues to be an ongoing concern, unfortunately, the day and age that we're currently living in. Also to highlight, the cost of doing nothing is not free. We're either going to pay for it through a reduction in educational experience or quality, or we're going to pay for it monetarily. So just want to get that out there. The cost of doing nothing is not free. To step through what the actual monetary cost is of those portables, this calculation here is assuming that each portable building will contain 3 classrooms. So that's roughly 120 additional classrooms that we're talking through the end of 2040. Once you have, once you exceed a certain number of classrooms, portables in any given campus, you have to provide additional restroom facilities. So that's what that portable restroom number is for. The soft cost addresses the cost of the furnishings, the desks, the chairs, the whiteboards, computer equipment, whatever you name it in that classroom. So we're looking at $7.6 million roughly to just add portable classrooms. And again, it only addresses the traditional classroom space. It doesn't address any of the other needs that come along with increased capacity of students. In addition, there's no line item on the budget for portables, so any money that would be needed to pay for those would come out of money that's already earmarked for educational programming or staffing. This is an illustrative view, the shock and awe of the conversations that we've had. So currently the high school has one building of portables. There are 6 classrooms within that building. So if we choose to go the route of only adding portable classrooms, the high school will eventually have this many or more portable buildings on its campus. So if there's 6 classrooms each year, that's 36, but the high school will really need 42 additional classrooms to get to the capacity needs of 2040. So as a high school parent, when you consider the nightmare we already have with the pickup and drop-off line, and then essentially we're adding 36 more classrooms, I'll be glad my kids are graduated by that point in time and not have to manage that. And then finally, a timeline of what that would look like. Of course, the growth will be incremental, so the classrooms will be added incrementally, but this gives you an idea of where the needs are for that portable space at each of the schools, throughout the years. Again, growing from 12 portable classroom buildings today up to 52 in 2040. And if you assume 25 students in each classroom, that's roughly 2,700 students will be in portables throughout their entire school day in 2040, which we're estimating to be roughly 34% of the population at that time, or in another way, 2,700 represents about 50% of today's district population. The other thing to bear in mind is that the life of a portable classroom is about 12 to 15 years. So for sure, anything that we already have in our possession will have to be replaced, within the next however many years. The two at the junior high already need to be replaced if we decide to use them. So that $7.6 million that I highlighted is just a one-time cost to buy them the first time. But if we're looking at going out through 2040, that's 17 years, every single one of them will need to be replaced at some point. So a large portion of that, that cost will likely need to be repeated.
Good evening. I'm Matthew Sutter. My family has lived in Perrysburg for the last 10 years. I have 4 daughters. One's a 2022 graduate. I have twins that are 2025 graduates, and my youngest is a 2028 graduate. I am also an executive board member of the Perrysburg Athletic Boosters Club. So I wanted to get that out there. So we began looking at all the schools, and I move around a lot, so. As we looked at all the schools, we started with the high school, and what we have today, we have about 1,736 students. By 2040, we'll have in excess of 2,500 students. So what does that mean? Today, we have enough with capacity with the existing portables. Without the portables, we're only at about 1,600. Looking forward, with adding additional classrooms, we will need to add somewhere between 36 and 40 classrooms to meet the needs of 2040. Now, that range is based on the decision of the board and how the board and the administration treats special education. So we'd be on the high side if we maintain the same ratio with special education. So as we increase capacity, to facilitate the additional students, it's about 107,000 square feet. That'd be about 80,000 square feet of classroom space, and then other ancillary space that relates to cafeteria, office, STEM labs, music labs, art labs, things like that. We also looked at what we needed to do to educate in the current environment and where the future is headed. We need to begin to focus on STEM classroom space, learning labs, and open collaboration space, much like that we have at HPI. We hear from the parents of students at HPI that they want to continue that learning environment. I happen to work, I spent some time working in workforce development. The business climate that we work in here in Northwest Ohio and throughout the region all wants to work in collaborative space. Many of the large progressive companies have open collaboration space. If we start them at elementary school, they're accustomed to that type of learning environment and working environment. As we expand, obviously we're going to need to expand the cafeteria. We're going to need to expand pickup, drop-off, office space, and common area space. We really drilled down on this site, and the pickup, drop-off was already mentioned once, but it's not good. It's very hard for those of us when you do pick up and drop off at the high school. It gave us a nice opportunity to reimagine efficiency from the parent side. What we have here, this is just a possible rendering. We started challenging the collaborative as a committee to what these school buildings could look like as we're adding more space. What does 40 classrooms look like? Where could you add it? Do we have the space? Are we large enough? Do we have to acquire more land? What else goes into this 2040 goal? Fortunately, at the high school, we do have the space to add if that was the direction we went to the north. But we also talked about other things that go into the education system. Will there be more musicians? Will there be more athletes? Will there be more performers? And when we look back at 2001, compared it to today, we had almost 300 more athletes. We have 18 more teams. We have double the size of the band, more than double the size of the orchestra, and I suspect more than double the size of the choir. This is all today's information. When we look at what a 2,600, 2,500 student high school would look like, it takes us out. And we add those projections. We're adding another 200 athletes, be adding additional teams. The band would grow again by 50%. Orchestra would grow. We need space to accommodate those things. I remember the first time we met Dr. Short when we came into the high school, he said, Perrysburg values extracurriculars. We believe that our students do better if they participate in extracurriculars. Doesn't matter if it's vocal music, if it's orchestra, if it's band, if it's sports, but we want our kids participating. On the flip side, if we value that, we have to have space for those kids because they can't participate if we don't have space for them. My daughter plays lacrosse. Last week, basketball, boys, girls was practicing because they were still in the state tournament. We had baseball, softball was in season. We had wrestling. We had junior jackets going on. Lacrosse practice had to get canceled because their only opportunity was outside, and there was sleet and it was ice on the field. We as a district can do better for that, and that's just an anecdotal situation in mine. But it's like that for many other parents over and over again. The band, I think, practices on the asphalt because there's no place for them to practice in the fall. They're practicing on asphalt. We can do better. We can offer things like that for all the students. Interestingly, as we look through what the next 20 years looks like for sports, boys volleyball, girls wrestling, and field hockey are OHSAA sports. It's just a matter of time before that comes to Perrysburg. The demand will be there as the district grows. And then we looked at dance, esports. They're giving scholarships at Lourdes and other places for esports. Great place for kids to go on to extracurricular activities in college and make some money doing it. We've got rugby, that's already here as a club sport. Indoor track is a club sport. We have fall rowing. We got robotics. There's a lot of different things that are on the horizon that we need to plan for. And this statistic came out last night. Hall Prairie has 72% of their students enrolled in vocal, orchestra, or band. That's an amazing number. And that doesn't count the Hall Prairie kids that are in club sports and junior jackets, lacrosse, soccer, other things. These kids are busy. They're doing a lot of stuff, and we need to prepare for them for the next level when they get to high school. So one of the things we looked at, there's a lot of talk about additional performance space and auxiliary athletic space. You're probably familiar with Rossford. They're putting in a nice new building that has some space in it, probably, 40,000 square feet maybe. But it allows expansion and allows for more space to be used by the students, by the band, by other groups. Their facility, I've had the luxury of touring it, has esports. They have boys and girls wrestling. They got a golf simulator, baseball, softball. They got extra basketball courts. I heard today that the boys basketball team may not have practice space on Friday. They're playing for the district championship, and with all the extra things going on, wrestling districts is going on in the gym, a lot of demand on space. So once again, we can do better. We need to be projecting and planning for that as a group. Moving on to the junior high. We're fortunate with the junior high being as large as it is because it was built as a high school, and it does have a lot of space for growth. Right now we have about 831 students. We're projecting to go to about 1,200. So it does need some additional classrooms. We're looking at 12 to 14 classrooms, but a lot of that deals with modernizing the learning environment, because I think the building was built 58 years ago or thereabouts. So as we move forward, we want to be able to have additional space for special ed, art, music, STEM. We just added a little bit of STEM space for Jackie, but there needs to be more. Once again, pick up and drop off was another big topic there. It's a little more efficient. Dr. W is pushing the parents to move pretty quick over there. I experience it every morning, but great opportunity there. So what we did here is we asked, what does it look like? And once again, the collaborative rose to the occasion. You can see some expansion with music and art on the near the auditorium, and then adding some classrooms where the portables are really may get us a lot of what we need. The other thing about that site is the site where Steinecker Stadium is, and that is where a lot of people see and visualize Perrysburg. They come for football, they come for soccer, they come for lacrosse. They come to that stadium. Junior high track has their track meets there. We want that to be a showpiece, because that may be the only thing that they see with respect to Perrysburg is the junior high and that facility. And lastly, Hall Prairie. The thing that really struck me out here in the community from time to time, that we didn't plan Hall Prairie, we didn't build it big enough, it's overcrowded. Well, this is very clear that it's not. We have 817 students in Hall Prairie. Right now we have a capacity for over 1,000. And we did plan it properly so that when we do need to get to the 1,200 or thereabouts that we estimate for 2040, it's only 8 new classrooms. And you can clearly see that you can add those classrooms onto the wings, and doesn't change the site one bit, but it also then allows for that continued learning environment. I can see.
Put it back on Mike's stand. Hopefully that stays. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Todd France. My wife and I have been residents of the city of Perrysburg since 2016. We have 2 daughters at Frank Elementary. So I'll be talking about the elementary school situation. We can see the statistics, there we go, here up on the table. We are over capacity at 3 of the 4 schools, all except for Toth are using portables. And we can see that, based on future projections, that situation is gonna require quite a few new classrooms. This is kind of an overview of the topics I'll be presenting in a little bit more detail in just a bit, but I want to direct your attention to the last bullet. Have you heard about the portable situation? So to give you a different perspective of the situation at the elementary school level, by 2040, based on our projections, nearly half of our students would be in portables, K through 4. So just nearly half of our students would need to be in those. So this was one of the topics that we spent a very long time discussing at our meetings throughout the past year, and thought about different ways to address the needs of our youngest learners. We certainly considered constructing buildings kind of similar in size to our current buildings. And while there are some benefits to having neighborhood schools kind of scattered throughout the district, we felt that it was from an efficiency standpoint, to be thinking about administrative needs of having staffing at fewer rather than more buildings, of heating and cooling and maintenance, and certainly construction costs of a more centralized or larger facility. You can think of it as being cheaper to build and maintain a duplex rather than 2 individual houses, right? So that's the strategy that we are recommending moving forward, and I'll touch on that in more detail as well. So here we can see conceptualizations of the 4, and actually that projector over there is a little bit easier to see with the blue outlines. But we can see these are, again, just conceptualizations of what we might envision the 4 elementary schools to be once they are kind of redeveloped and redesigned. We have, again, top left is just a 800 student school, which is about 200 students more than are currently at Fort Meigs, but it's certainly doable. We saw that at Shoreland Elementary in the Washington Local District, and then adding on to and upgrading Fort Meigs, Toth, and Woodland to bring them up to a similar standard. I think the one thing that I wanted to point out here is, as Matt was talking about previously, this term collaborative, right? This collaborative spaces. And I think that's a really important point to keep in mind as we rethink these elementary schools. I teach college students engineering, and about 4 years ago, we moved from a 50-year-old building, very traditional in nature, individualized classrooms, to a purposely designed building for 21st century careers, right? And so we have collaborative space, we have flexible spaces where students are just so much better able to communicate with one another, to work on projects, and to develop those professional skills that, regardless if they're going into skilled trades, if they're going the college route, employers are really, really looking for. So it's just made a world of difference from my perspective on that. Another thing I'd mention is that as we took our tour of the different facilities and we went to, say, Woodland and Frank and Toth, most of us in here would probably walk into those buildings like this building and say, you know, if we're optimists, it's a very mediocre facility, right? And then we go into Fort Meigs Elementary, which was built over 30 years ago. We say it's pretty nice, but it's markedly different than the other older facilities, right? And we can think of the same kind of analogy between HPI and the junior high, but the difference is everyone goes to the junior high. Everyone goes to HPI. If we have these pocket or these separate elementary schools like we do, right, and we have some students going to a 50, 60-year-old facility that's not been upgraded and a brand new school or a school from the 90s, that wasn't okay with the committee. So we want to be sure we're being equitable, providing all of our students an opportunity to learn in, like I said, purposely designed spaces that are going to prepare them for the careers that, you know, we as parents hope they might consider going into. So what about Frank? So Frank was built just a few years after Toth in the 50s. It was built so quickly after Toth because of the post-war baby boom, and to kind of quickly accommodate the rapid growth at that time, Frank was constructed on slab rather than on a basement like Toth. And that's maybe a subtle difference, but it was cheaper at the time to do so. But in order to gain access to plumbing and gas and electric and to maintain the building at Toth, it's way easier on their foundation rather than the deferred maintenance that we saw on Frank. So that presents a challenge. And with that foundation, we can't build up, right? So if any expansion were to happen at Frank, it would have to go into kind of the limited space, and that is our smallest site of our schools. It would be so challenging that not only would we have to have, you know, take up most of that space for expanding, we wouldn't really have, it wouldn't be logistically feasible really from a transportation perspective. So we had to kind of rethink what to do about Frank. And the other thing to point out is that it's already quite close to Fort Meigs Elementary and quite close to Toth. So it doesn't really align, as Superintendent Hassler was alluding to earlier, it doesn't really align or map well to the population distribution in our district to have these elementaries so close together. And I'll show kind of an image of that later on. So a few other things to consider from the Frank Elementary standpoint is that for the foreseeable future, right, based on these recommendations, it's going to need to serve, continue to serve for quite a while as an elementary space for the current students that are there, but also when if construction were to happen for renovations and so forth, it serves as a swing space for those students so they're not learning in a construction zone essentially. The other thing I'd note about Frank, it's still very much a usable facility. So I'd mentioned that compared to Fort Meigs, not so great perhaps under first impression, but my first impression to Frank was like, this is pretty good. It's kind of modern. And the reason is because both my daughters went to Union Elementary for preschool in Maumee. And when Frank was built, which was the same year that the gymnasium was added onto this facility, Union Elementary, which our 3, 4, and 5-year-olds use for preschool, that was 88 years old already. So to put that in perspective, 5 years after the end of Civil War, 6 years, 6 years before the telephone was invented, 9 years before the light bulb was invented is when Union Elementary was first constructed. So, I mean, we're very appreciative of our relationship with Maumee for allowing us to use that space, but it would be nice to have our facilities kind of under our control, and Frank could certainly serve as that. One other thing to point out there is that Perrysburg, it says, serves approximately 206 students, but that's really an underrepresentation of the potential for the preschoolers that we have here in the district. So, for example, a lot of parents would like to send their kids there, but there's a wait list because we're kind of at capacity for what Maumee allows us to use there. And it's logistically challenging to get to cross the Conant Street Bridge. You're parking at a neighborhood church, you're walking down an alley or crossing a road, oftentimes with toddlers in tow, and then trying to get to Frank, others trying to get to other elementaries to pick up your other kids around the same time. So some parents just choose not to send their children there for that logistical reason. I would also say that Frank serves as a great community resource, and it can continue to serve as both an academic space and a non-traditional academic space as well. But quick anecdote from yesterday, I was there doing some soccer practices with 5, 6, and 7-year-old girls. It was being used from 4 o'clock in the afternoon, right after school got out, by an after-school program, all the way through 8 p.m. yesterday, just as a community resource, which we all certainly appreciate. All right, so that takes us to this image here, which kind of re-envisions where the new school could potentially be, right, somewhere in that southwest area of town where there's a lot of growth at, and it better kind of segments where the elementary schools are serving. So, for example, my daughters have classmates that live way out in the west Saddlebrook neighborhood, and way down to the south in the Brookhaven neighborhood. If you're living in the Horseshoe Bend neighborhood, you might be sending your kid all the way over to Woodland Elementary. If you're in the McKinley Woods neighborhood just south of 475, you could be sending your kid right to Fort Meigs, but as Tom mentioned earlier, if you're just down the street, you also might be, your kid might be taking a bus past Fort Meigs, then past Frank, and then getting to Toth. So that certainly presents some challenges from a logistical standpoint. So I think that's all I had to mention, and next up is specialized spaces. Thanks for your attention.
I'm Jake Miley. My wife and I are new to the district as of May of 21. We have a 5th grader at HPI and then a 3rd and 1st grader at Fort Meigs. And this is actually my wife's first year as the lunchroom monitor at Fort Meigs as well, so she's having fun controlling some students there. But real quick on some of the specialized spaces, which on paper, the classroom numbers are what we need to make work, but as we all know, these specialized spaces that we've been talking about are equally as critical to the function of the school. And so what this slide represents is really what spaces within each of the buildings are being addressed with what we're proposing to get to 2040. And so I won't go through all these, but if it's got an X next to it, that means that space is being addressed at that school location. And Jackie's going to talk some specifics on those.
Thank you. So we know that from previous slides that we're growing, our athletics are growing. In order for us to continue being the destination district, we have to look at all aspects. And if you look at our high school theater, music, they're ranked right up at the top. And so that's why at the lower levels, you also have to accommodate so that we bring them on up. What'd they say, 72% of the HPI students are into music. The other area that is going to be looked at is our special education. We have some of the most amazing students in our special education area. And don't they deserve to have just as high of quality as any other student? We need to make sure that we are staying up to date with them. And when we went to Shoreland Elementary and I saw what they have done for their special education areas in the sensory rooms, and it just, I'll be honest, it kind of broke my heart, because I'm like, wow, we're providing for our kids right now, but we could do so much better, so much better. And I don't know if it's just me, but I think that that area is growing. We are getting more and more special education students. And so we've got to do for them as well. As far as the STEM labs, robotics, it's becoming a huge thing. Yes, my STEM lab was just updated, but you cannot run a robotics class in my STEM lab. There just clearly there's no room. My kids are crammed in there now. And so that's an up and coming. That's also, if we look at Portrait of a Jacket, these additions go right along with a Portrait of a Jacket. And so that's why we're looking at these things at all levels, so that every student is able to achieve the greatest success.
And this next slide is just a few items that really fall outside of the individual school buildings, but still underneath the district's property as we're looking at growth and even some of the deferred maintenance. Transportation facility with the growth in the district, more buses. We understand that may need to be addressed going forward. Boiler system in this building, and then there's been talk as we're looking at the junior high with the stadium, restroom capacity, and even just circulation and safety around the stadium.
Okay. I'm sure the number one question is, what's going to cost? The answer is, I don't know. You didn't want to hear that, but that's, so the group of the community committee has gotten this far. They've got a recommendation focused on 2040, focused on eliminating the use of portables, and we provided enough cost information as we could to get us to this point to say what makes sense going forward. So back in November, we were talking about potential price tags, but not specific, just enough to be able to say, this makes sense, this is palatable, and built that in there, because we really can't develop the detailed costs until we know what we want to do. Now we know what we want to do, and we have some more work to do. So a couple things that was already been mentioned. Just the idea of we could build a fifth elementary, and then that means obviously what do you have? 5 elementaries, 5 administrative teams, and with and a disproportionate size among those schools. So to stay into 4 elementaries helps keep the operational cost down. The spacing has been mentioned. We're talking about efficiencies. Think about transportation. Right now we have buses that have to go past 2 elementary schools to get students to the 3rd one. So all those things will be able to be addressed with these projects and that we've considered. So and I'll talk about OFCC here in another slide in just a second, so I'll hold off on that. But just recognize that there's a lot of moving parts and pieces here, and we've gotten to this point, and assuming the board, with your feedback, is comfortable, then we're going to really start nailing down some of these other things. So this is a unified recommendation. So the committee worked. If you were in that first meeting, you go, the divergent thinking was huge. and then they worked and worked and worked, and boom, it got down to a consensus on what you see today, 2040, this is what it's gonna take. And if we're gonna do this, we're not gonna kick the can down the road. Let's look at that vision, what is it gonna take? And it looks like it is, financially doable based on those numbers. So our next step is for us to take this recommendation and take the feedback from the board and working with my committee, narrowing down some more details, working with the collaborative on specific estimates, then be able to come back to you, breaking down the project costs and financing options, because it's going to get complicated real fast, as we'll see here in a minute. One of those complicating factors is the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission. We have applied to be in the ELP program, Expedited Local Partnership Program. What this means is if we choose, and it's a choice, to participate in this program, our number is not yet up to be funded by the state on our building project. But what it does is the state will say, you enter in this project, we'll negotiate what they're going to pay for, what proportions, and then when our number comes up, we'll get that money. But at this point, they're doing their thing on a parallel path. They're going to look at our enrollment. They're going to look at our buildings. Then they're going to take their recommendations and what they think we're eligible for, and then we're going to have to marry the two projects together. And hopefully the two parallel paths come in similar places. And if we decide to use OFCC, now it's not necessarily 0 or 100. We could do some portion, maybe the new elementary we use OFCC, but we do all locally funded other projects. There's a lot of moving parts and pieces there. But our eligibility is up to 29%. And that's a high enough percentage that it's worth considering. There are some restrictions that you sometimes bristle at using state money, but in this case it may be worth it. We don't know what that is yet. So two questions are going to be what will they fund, and then when will our number come up? So there's two questions we need to answer before we can make a final recommendation. And again, as I said, we would get the money after the fact probably. We would be do at least some of the construction before our number would come up, and then in theory, what the state would do is write us a check for our portion. Now, a couple of school districts I've talked to have done it recently. The state's been kind of renegotiating that to give the money over time. But if they do as they've done in the past, they give us that check, then we have a choice with that check to do what we want. It's not exactly right, but we could pay down our debt at that point and relief to the taxpayers, or we could use that money for another phase. So the board would have decisions to make at that time, and hopefully we would have talked about that in terms of when that time comes. So a couple things to keep in mind. We have two outstanding debt issues right now. The HPI building is the newest one, and of course the high school and those projects. That one's coming off here in the next year and a half. So that's about 2 mills. So it's a good time to go there. We actually have 2 mills falling off, and we'll have to add something on. But just recognize we've got an operating levy that needs to be renewed. We've got to build these operating costs into that levy at the same time, unless we want to do an operating levy with each construction phase. That's a topic of conversation. And then the PI levy that we've renewed every 5 years since the 80s is back up. So we've got a lot of work to do. A very short time frame, because if we want to move on this, let's say November with a bond issue, the board will probably have to act on a resolution of necessity in June with a resolution to proceed in July to give us enough time to be on the ballot. The resolution of necessity just allows the county auditor to calculate the millage required to put it on the ballot and those kind of things. So we'll work through that when we get a little bit closer on those time frames. So that's it. So we're ready. We're poised. We've already done some work. As soon, if the board said we're on board, obviously you're still going to have questions because you're going to want to see the numbers. But if we think the scope makes sense, which I think it does personally, 2040 is the goal. We'll get to work and try and get a proposal to get you very, very soon, because obviously June's going to be here very, very quickly. So. Back to Jake.
So talking about timelines, just one thing to keep in mind, regardless of the timeline, it's a multi-year endeavor. And so what we've put together are just two timeline examples. This first one is really based on the most immediate needs, and then spreads the work across, a further an expanded timeline of almost just before that 2040 goal. And so a couple things in terms of the colors, you'll see, the darker green, which really only applies, which is site selection, only applies to the new elementary school. And then the lighter green is the design phase. And then the orange represents bidding, and then construction and closeout. And so, each one of those groupings that you see represents a project. And so looking at this one, the new elementary school comes as a priority and as first. And then also what comes initially is the work at the high school, and then some of that deferred maintenance. And then as you go on, you can kind of, see what other projects are represented, and then where they fall on the timeline. This one has a longer span. This example 2 is really looking at, what if we try to condense, this process as much as we can. And you can see even under this scenario, we're looking at, a 2030 work even into 2030. And so, these certainly are not set in stone, but just a graphic depiction of potential timelines, and really to give us an understanding of, how much work, is involved with each of these projects.
Not made for short people. Good evening. My name is Kristen Haiti, and I've been a Perrysburg resident for the last 12 years, and a parent to 3 students currently enrolled in Perrysburg schools. And I appreciate the opportunity to present our plan. So, where do we go from here? After a year spent learning how the district works, touring buildings, and endless discussions, our committee is nearly finished presenting our recommendation to you. The Fiscal Analysis Subcommittee will continue to work with the Fiscal Office through the spring, who will then work with the administration to analyze the plan and financial options. Our committee fully respects the Perrysburg community and our role in representing their best interests, and we very much look forward to continuing that work in the coming months. Because this is our community, the district we choose to raise the most important little ones in our lives, and this is a defining moment for Perrysburg. If we look back to the 1950s, we see another period of rapid growth for the school district. This is the only decade we added 2 entire buildings, including one building where you're removing a 3rd floor that was literally condemned. Perrysburg Schools was facing aging facilities, rapid growth, and some pretty tough decisions. I can imagine that might sound familiar to anyone else in this room right now. Our own period of explosive growth is here, and this committee believes in our fiscal responsibility to plan not just for now, but years down the road, and support Perrysburg Schools as a district that embraces growth and thrives, not struggles. Which is why we've presented this plan to you. A brand new elementary school with the capacity to meet our growth and more accurately align facilities where students are, all while repurposing Frank, a beloved community hallmark that we heard a lot of feedback on, and updating the other 3 elementaries equitably and to meet the needs of all. And this brings us to the goal we had from day one. Plan out as far as possible. Long-term planning now will enable us to meet long-term growth and ensure district capacity all the way to 2040. I have 3 children in Perrysburg, preschool through 4th grade, and have been continually blown away by not only the education they receive, but the community this district fosters. Perrysburg School District is an incredible asset to this city, and we would do ourselves a disservice by not equipping the district with the tools to continue offering a rigorous education and competitive sports environment while building our children up as capable and responsible adults. I know that my children are thriving because of this district and the staff, faculty, and educators who pour their hearts into their work. I feel privileged to be a part of a committee that endeavors to make sure even more children are able to benefit from Perrysburg's mission, ensuring all students achieve their greatest potential. On behalf of the Facilities Master Planning Committee, we thank the district for their patience and guidance, the board for their thoughtful consideration of our proposal, and the community for making Perrysburg a city that you just don't want to leave. Thank you for your time.
I just want to say, so we'll turn it over here to the board in just a second. I want to say on behalf of the board, thank you very much for the work that you've done since, what did I hear, October of 2021? 61 people coming together with divergent backgrounds, likely divergent views to come up with such a unified presentation, a thoughtful presentation. Certainly addressed a lot of the concerns that I've heard about in the community. So again, thank you to not just you guys for the presentation, but as well as your fellow committee members for all the work that you've done for so long. I can imagine it's been very difficult. So with that, we're going to move on to the, are there any other comments? Okay, well, thank you very much. We'll now move into the board discussion. Are there any, I will lightly ask questions, probably clarifying questions for this committee or the administration, or any comments anybody would like to discuss tonight.
Yeah, I just have a couple things. First of all, thanks to the committee, the work. You know, we've got several packets over several years from different committees coming together, and this kind of brings it to the head, so to speak, with respect to the presentation. Fantastic information, and consistent with information we continue to receive in the last few studies. So let me see if I can summarize this. It's a unified recommendation to the board. That's what I heard, unified. And one of the things I sat on in operations for many years was we had an interim maintenance director who gave us a proposal to maintain our buildings, to get them up to speed, and the millions of dollars that would cost to do so. I think we've done a fantastic job maintaining our buildings, but at a cost of a PI levy every 5 years. And then the PI levy is not sufficient enough financially to do what it takes to keep our buildings up to speed. So the buildings are older, but the buildings have been well kept, but it's been costly. And so I pulled out something from 2016, just a summer PI project list, looking back over all the lists that we've had over the years, and you continue to see the same old things that come up. Woodland, roof repairs. Junior high school, roof repairs. Commodore, roof replacement. You're talking $100,000, $80,000, and I can go on and name other parts, but if you'd go back and look at projects over the summers, spring, during the school year, when things come up unexpectedly, and when things are planned for with a levy for 5 years for a PI, we've done a good job maintaining, but we're falling behind. And I think we've been chipping away financially, and at the taxpayer's expense, chipping away financially to make this happen. So when I heard about the aging facilities and deferred maintenance, and it's true, what information we're given, $8.5 million difference from 2018 report that we received to today. It's costing $8.5 million more to do the same work that we were asked to do a few years ago. The other thing that the cost of doing nothing is not free. How true that is. Again, we ask for PI money from our community off every 5 years. But when you look at costs for the trailers or the portables, and the figure given to us tonight was $7.6 million to add portables, which it sounded again that the committee were 100% agreed that they must go. That's what I heard tonight. Just kind of summarizing here. And looking at the growth for 2040, that's going to be here before we know it. Let's not rush it. But the fact is, you look at the reports we've had before, looking back in 2000, this is 2018, and if you look at the graphs that we were giving and the plots, it shows us 2023 what the numbers would be. So we're going to reach those numbers awfully fast. 2040 is a pretty nice year to shoot for. The other thing is looking at, I think Jackie mentioned about specialized areas. We hit academic classrooms, we hit extracurricular, because the classroom does extend beyond the four walls of a classroom. So extracurricular, we're talking about the arts, the musicals, the plays, the athletics, and they also talk about special education. So we did hear tonight, I heard tonight anyway, that we're falling in line with our mission statement that all students, again, will reach the greatest potential, and we have the facilities to do that too. So that's how I summarize it. Again, I thank the committee. We've had a lot of research, a lot of information given to us over the years, but you did a good job of bringing it all together. I can imagine how it started out and how it's ended, but again, I heard unified recommendation to the board.
Well, the thing that I noticed is this is what at least my third go around in doing something like this, and I find the process absolutely fascinating. And to have 60 of you working on this for a year, this was a tough cookie to bite off. and I know some of you had eyes open, some of you that had, I mean, like Ray said, you all came in with different viewpoints, and it's a messy process. That's what we just started hitting that on the strategic planning committee, and getting that messy process and how the beauty of how it all just kind of, y'all work together like some of those pictures showed on there. I think it is such an amazing and wonderful thing that 60 people in our community gave up a year of your life, because it wasn't just at the meetings that you were thinking about this. You were thinking about it beyond that. And I can't thank you enough for really lifting that weight for our community, for our students, present, future, to help us, guide us and the administration as to what needs to be done. So I am very grateful for the amount of work that you did. My heart goes to you, because I know that is really a lot of work. So thank you for a great presentation summarizing a whole year you just did in what, an hour? It took a lot to get to that, and I understand that, so thank you.
That was very thorough. Thank you for all the work, because I know it's not easy. Looking at this, I hope that people direct the community to this report and what you guys have done, because it is very thorough. And living in the district, I know I'm not a lifelong resident. I've been here almost 20 years, and I've been here we moved in right around the time the high school had opened, but it's been a conversation for 20 years. So it really gets me when I hear people say nobody planned. So we know that's false. We know it's a false narrative. So I hope that you all push the truth, and that's one thing I've always talked about. The facts matter, and it's all right here, and it is shocking. I do greatly appreciate bringing preschool home. That has been one of my things as a mom of two grads. And one who was in preschool for 3 years. They belong with their peers, they belong in their neighborhoods, they belong in their neighborhood school. There is quite a big difference in disparity between the K to 4, so I'm glad to see that Frank, and we're Frank people, Frank family, I'm glad it's still gonna remain and it's gonna be put to good use, and be a great facility for preschool if that's what we choose to do. Also, as a principal who worked in a building that was not built big enough, we did add portables the first year I was there. Matt, you know what I'm talking about. It is, if you've ever been, while it's needed, necessary, because we have nowhere else to put them, you can't put 60 kids in a classroom, it is not a safe, it does, and now mind you, this was 14 years ago. We had radios, there were no bathrooms, they had to come in and out, we had to have a plan. I mean, I can't imagine having to oversee that today, in today's climate. So again, thank you for all the work that you did. I love hearing all of the ideas and what we can do to make our students and our future students. The 17-year plan is awesome, and that we can continue to move forward for our students becoming part of a society that works in collaboration, works as a team, when whatever they do, whether it be trades, the service, or big corporation, it matters how they get along with people. So thank you.
I'm going to say thank you as well. Definitely a lot to digest, and as somebody who went through 3 of the buildings, Woodland, this building was the junior high, and the current junior high, which was the high school. And now my daughter's at the new high school. I've seen these buildings transition through, you know, the upgrades that need to be done throughout the years. And we have done, like Ray pointed out, a fabulous job at doing those updates, keeping the things that needed to be done, improve making spaces for, you know, special needs and stuff like that. But a lot more work to do, obviously, as we continue to grow, which we have over the years. And, you know, just a lot of thoughtful consideration was put into this. And I look forward to keep on reviewing it and getting the cost and discussing it.
So, Mr. President, so the board's going to make a recommendation to Mr. Hostler to move forward with the costing? How are you going to?
Yeah, I think that's where my mind goes now next. So listening to all of your comments, I'm generally hearing support for this recommendation, or at least enough to start putting together the cost of this recommendation. I mean, Ms. Larimer said it really well, that we just heard a year and a half, or a year's worth of work in about an hour and a half. Excellent presentation, but there's a little bit of soak time that we likely need, and obviously we need to hear the costs.
Yeah.
So what I would recommend is, let's start pulling the costs of what we heard tonight. Let's put this on the agenda for the upcoming March meeting.
March 20th.
March 20th meeting, to be able to discuss it more fully. There'll be an opportunity for public participation at that meeting as well. I'm sure we'll hear from others, we'll get emails, we'll hear back from the public as well. We'll be able to synthesize some of those thoughts. We may have other questions for this committee, maybe not quite off the hook yet, but if you are, we have a chance to address some of those comments as well. So that would be my recommendation.
We have your emails.
I think what would take that, what knocks that recommendation off the tracks is if somebody has on this board has a very different idea of what they want done.
Well, I don't
Do
know.
we,
how much,
go ahead, excuse me, go
how
ahead.
much more discussion we would need to get it moving forward for pricing.
Pricing, right.
But I think if you need a motion tonight to make a recommendation to proceed with that, or do you want to wait till March 20th and does it make a difference? I mean,
No, I think we can begin. I mean, it doesn't take a vote to just direct Randy and I to go ahead and start to bring these things together. We've got pieces of this. It's just we were at a point where we didn't have the board very easily could have said, this is a great presentation, but we'd like to see this, and then we'd have to go do that. So we didn't want to really head too far down that path until we knew this was the steps that we need to take moving forward. So we'll be prepared to be able to do that.
We've been working on the cost side and the funding. I've been meeting with, our investment bankers and bond counsel and running those scenarios, and then have some feedback from my committee. But we need to go back to, there are so many, the amount of options that we need to boil it down, because I would go through the options, but we'll be here another hour. And so I'll save that for a rainy day.
Well, does any of the volatility going on in Columbus right now in the education arena, how does that affect us?
You want the long or short answer?
Probably they all want the short answer.
Yeah, short answer is yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what I was afraid of.
And let me be very specific. House Bill 1, because of the change in valuations, impacts a millage ask, right? It doesn't impact what the dollar amount, but it'll impact how much we ask for from a millage standpoint. It also impacts our ability to borrow, because your debt limit is based on your total valuation. So if the valuation drops 10%, essentially drops our debt limit ability by 10%.
Oh, gotcha, okay.
And there's an exception to that, and this is where it's complicated, because if we do an OFCC project, then we get an exception to the debt limit. So
Okay.
you're potentially held hostage by the state if you, and frankly, our debt limit by today's number, because until that bond falls off and stuff, it's all limited by what we currently have. So it's complicated.
Yeah, and I think for us, I think the advice would be to go ahead and plan based on the existing laws and the existing structure that is available to schools, because even though a bill has been introduced, a bill can take on many different changes, and it could be something that gets kind of hung out there and then in June, the last day of June, added to the budget bill, which will be passed on June 30th. But we have to have information and things submitted already in that order to be on the ballot. So I think we can keep an eye on what's happening in Columbus with this bill, but we don't know what that outcome is going to be. So I think we have to keep an eye on that, but also move forward with what exists today in terms of law and structure. So.
Well, you said it to me, Randy, not too long ago, deal with the certainty.
Yeah.
And so we can go ahead then and work with what we know.
And that's all we can do. We'll build
Okay.
we know what the risks are. We know what the risk, legislative risk, we know what interest rate risks are. We have all those risks, we'll have to build those into our recommendations. We know, inflationary risk, right? Just the cost of waiting, there's a risk.
Right.
An escalation of pricing. So all that stuff's got to be built into that.
So does SB 1 affect us with the restructuring that they passed today? Or, I know it was just the Senate, but does that affect any of this going on? Okay, good.
Say, in any event, we need to know the cost.
Right.
Yeah.
We need to
Exactly.
start nailing numbers down
As Heidi
to
said,
vet out then this recommendation and
cost
what
of
is
doing
possible.
nothing. Right.
Yeah.
Cost of doing
There's
nothing.
two
Cost of doing nothing, yeah, from my vantage
sooner
point.
the
I
better
hear
to
that
get
That
from-
was
numbers.
such a great line. I
Right.
wrote that down. That was such a great line.
That's not an option.
So true.
Right. So the sooner the better, I think. if,
So are we
this-
waiting for like discussion and like follow-up questions at a later date?
Well,
We don't need to, but that,
you
yeah.
got something to say?
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to discuss, the gentleman from the collaborative mentioned that Frank was one of the buildings years ago that it was considered to tear down or then put money into it. So I was curious how much we put into it to get it up to speed so it was off the tear down list. And how much it would cost to, upgrade to make it a preschool compared to tearing it down and building a preschool. Because at some point, just like what was here, which was my junior high, at some point it was cost prohibitive and the recommendation was to tear it down instead of put money into it. So I'm just wondering, is that like fully looked at, and was that, compare the cost of doing that on the site of Frank? Because the problem still exists that were brought up, that it's on a slab, that you have to get to the plumbing, all those still exist. You're not solving that problem, is how I'm looking at it.
So, Ms. Swedbank, to clarify, you're looking also for an option to rebuild Frank to a building that would be, its best use would be as a preschool or as a refurbished elementary school? Is that the request?
Yes. I'm not saying do it. I'm just saying look at tearing that down and what would the cost be to put a preschool there? A brand-new preschool, yeah. If that's the recommendation, to have a preschool, standalone preschool, using that site. I'm just saying, in the past, and I've known districts have done that, like it's just cost prohibitive to keep on putting money into a building that's, help me with the age.
Okay, so you want to see the specific, because the recommendation is that potentially that Frank would be used as a preschool.
Correct,
You
but
want
what I'm hearing them say, the problems still are going to remain that we have. So again, you're Band-Aiding something that it'll do well for a little bit, but in 2040, are we going to talk about, we should, not should have, but we now want to tear it down, you know what I mean? I'm just, maybe look at that now instead of looking at it 2040.
Yeah, that's not.
I'm seeing a lot of head shakes, so is that something like you guys like, or?
That was explored, and using it as a swing space was a better idea, and then in 2040, we could revisit it, but we're trying
But then what I'm saying is to update it, to get, that costs money too, so would you look at the cost to do that now? Because again, you delay, it costs more than in, 24. So to me, I'm like, let's look at it now. Let's look at those two options now.
And we can look, we'll add it, we'll build that in. And just
That would
remember in
be-
the recommendation, the timelines, that Frank would be kind of like the last building we would touch anyway. So we can build that in our discussion.
Yeah. I'd like to see that. And when I was, hearing, that's the one thing that kept on, for me, sticking out, thinking, again, it's a Band-Aid, like, let's look at that.
I thought and correct me if I'm wrong, and I don't know who said it, because I was trying to take notes and look at the same time. Frank would be considered as a swing space, so we'd have to know how long the phase-in would be for the building of whatever, if we elect to go to add a new building as a K4 and use Frank as a swing space, that's gonna take a good, if we're moving people around, I would say probably a good 5 to 7 quick, and I'm, in my head. So that's 7 years out of the 17 right there, to use as a swing space, because we're gonna have to move people around. And I thought I saw it in there, but that was really tiny even on my laptop with my glasses, so I wasn't sure. But I thought it was in there based on the phase. So I think it is a great question to find out how much it would cost in 7 years, kind of with the cost of inflation or whatever it would be, to tear that down and add, and how much, what the qualifications are for preschool, because I know there's different things that you have to do, but having overseen a preschool, it seems like it would be pretty fitting in since it's a K building already. But being on the slab, I thought somebody had said that it's been, there's money in there in what we've done with the PI to fix it, that it's no longer having to be torn down if we were using OFCC.
Yeah, I think in 2005 is when that report was run, where it was above 66%. And I think since 2005, the PI brings in about 1.6 million a year. So during that time, we've been, trying to do things at all the buildings that are on that list of deferred maintenance. So when the OFCC evaluated it again, the last 2 times, it's been above that threshold. So if OFCC were to come in today to do this based on the most recent, they would say, don't tear it down. They would say it's it doesn't meet that criteria. So with the timeline, I pulled it up here. These are examples, and there's, as many financial options as there are, as Randy talked about, there's probably as many construction options, but in this scenario, Frank would be used as an existing school until, or part of a swing space, as they discussed, until the project's done in really 2036. So we're not talking about in 2 years after a bond issue were to be passed, Frank goes away. We would have to factor into either this plan or something shorter, that we're going to need that space for our existing students until the new building and the other buildings kind of catch up. So it does give the board some time to decide what what needs to happen. And during that time, if a boiler goes, if the roof goes, we're going to have to fix it. With all the deferred maintenance things that are there, if those things start to occur, we can't wait. We have to fix it. So there's things that are on that list between now and whenever there would be a bond issue passed. We're going to have to address those things. We can't not do it. So some of these things we'll have to take money and do that. And when you're looking at HVAC systems, when you begin to look at the cost just to do 1 or 2 pieces of that, and I think that's that's kind of the gravity. When you look at Fort Meigs with the heating system there, as we talked about earlier, it's kind of the original. It's over 30 years old, and we're having issues with it now. If that goes down, it's $2.9 million. Our PI for the whole district is $1.6 million. So that's where we start taking dollars away from other areas to fix that. So the longer that these things go out, we're having to not address them the more risk there is that we're going to have to pull dollars from other programming that affects kids and gets into the classroom directly. So that's one of the, that's kind of the seesaw that we're balancing right now, and why things are becoming more and more precarious. So,
And recognize if we go the OFCC route or don't, there's a merging at some point in time. We could say, I have no data, so this is just an example, so don't go run. If Frank says it's better off to tear it down, but we don't want to, that's okay. We can, as long as we use local funding to do it. So you don't have to go with OFC recommendations, just that recognize they're not going to help fund it. So we'll have all that, when it comes together, we'll have some of those individual project decisions at that time, right? We'll sign a contract at some point in time committing to certain things, and so.
Yeah, and understanding what those provisions are, what the OFCC requires will be an important part of this discussion.
Yeah, and at 29%, we probably need to listen.
You got to talk to, yeah.
Well
said.
No.
Would Frank be available, or that area, would that be available for some of the added athletic things that you talked about, the esports, lacrosse, rugby? Since there's some land there, would that be available to use for some of these up-and-coming things?
you've got. I think it's easier to keep it at the high school.
I'm sorry.
Easier to keep it at the high school, right?
Mhm.
I mean, the kids are there. They
Right.
don't have to drive and get in a car and.
Over to the Frank from the high school.
Yeah.
The city wants to put a big indoor facility, that'd be great.
And remember, it's only 5.5 acres. It sounds like a lot.
Yeah.
But it's not.
It isn't.
What?
Oh. The concentration and scale in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a one-story building. That multi-purpose building probably goes 35, 40 feet up, which would be less prominent where the high school is. The high school with the 2 stories and the pitched roof, it looked less out of place. If it went on this site, it'd be a monster building.
Right.
Embedded in a neighborhood, and the neighbors would not like it, and it'd stick out. You'd see it for a long ways away.
Okay. Definitely would not fit in the neighborhood.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.
You said it, we didn't have to.
Well, I can tell you, it just doesn't, and with transportation, and while I appreciate you thought about it, I just can't imagine that being anything other than a one-story, just because how tight it is over there.
So it looked like, if I'm looking at this correctly, Frank's deferred maintenance was $6 million. And I think in Rossford, I think their standalone elementary was, the new one was like 22.5 million to build, 22,500,000 to build or something like that. So you know what I'm saying? Like, so you take that 6 and, that's what I'm saying. That's where I want it to compare, to see what that would be. Again, I don't know how big it would have to be. I don't know if it's 1 story, 2 stories, I have no idea. But just something to compare.
Well, I'm sure we're going to have other thoughts, other questions. This is the idea generation has just occurred in 15 minutes. Wait until you've had a chance to sleep on it. So,
Well, and that would be my thought. First of all, the committee's met for a year, they've got some great recommendations. So someone comes up with, hopefully they'll call somebody, like, people on the committee, Tom, the board, I can show them paperwork. But, between now and then, between the 20th, this will be out streamed in the media. But, when people have questions, certainly want them to ask, right? And the money will come up, and we'll see what that's going to be like down the road and go from there. But
I don't speak for Mr. Hostler, but if you have questions before the 20th that you want us to prepare for, if there's something that we hadn't thought of or something you thought of, hey, like Mrs. Eubank's question, if we give us a heads up, give us a little time to prepare for it, we'd have some better answers then.
Great. So I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions from the community. So is there a strategic way you would like them to be addressed so that we can discuss them, so that they're not just like maybe one to me and one to Sue and one to Ray and one to Eric and one to Kelly? Could we have them like directed to, do you have somewhere you'd like them to go, Mr. Hostler, so that, we can make sure that we're getting a coordinated effort and everybody's voice, can be heard, at least, so that we can kind of get an idea of what's being asked and what the, what the concerns or what the kudos, pros and cons, obviously. It's, it's a lot. Obviously, and I keep going back to the quote, you know, there's the cost of doing nothing. But I would just think it would just be a better coordinated effort if we have somewhere where we can direct those, because it's going to be out in the community.
So
And put it on the Facebook page or, you know, email, hey, if you guys are on the website, if you have, you know, here's the presentation. This is how we, you know, please, you know, send us your questions or thoughts.
We do have an email that the committee used to communicate, so it's specifically for the work of the committee. So what we can do is share that out, so people can email that directly, so we can embed it in the presentation and the materials. The other thing is we've started an FAQ. So if you do get a question from a community member, if you could let us know, we can begin to build an FAQ that we will update with answers as well, so that we'll make it available to people so that, you know, if you're getting the same question from 3 different people, there becomes this kind of resource that you can look through those and say, okay, here's the answer to that one question. That way you're not having to do it all on your own, and, you know, so the FAQ is helpful. So please forward, you know, if you do get those questions, please forward them to us. That way we'll use them to build those, and then we can respond and copy everybody so you can see what that is. Once, like going back to 2012 with HPI, once we got to a place where there were a lot of the questions and then you start to see them recycle, we can just begin to refer people to the FAQ. So we're not there, but that's ultimately very helpful to residents, so that, you know, here are, you know, the 15, 16, 25 questions that we've received, and yours is number 12.
Right, so
yeah.
maybe if you could, you know, just thoughts, but putting it out there, obviously, as a Google Doc on the website, so you can add them and people can keep going back and looking, instead of asking us, and you can, oh, I already see it on the FAQ, here's the answer.
Yep. No, that's
Perfect.
great.
Thank you.
Yep. Appreciate that.
Okay. Well, again, thank you very much, presenters, for tonight. Excellent job, excellent work, excellent recommendation. So more to come in the March meeting. With that, I am going to ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Dr. Reffert, Ms. Larimer, and roll call, please.
Dr. Reffert,
Yes.
Ms. Larimer,
Yes.
Mrs. Eubank,
Yes.
Mr. Pullman, Mr. Bennington.
Yes, thank you all. Have a good evening. We are adjourned.
Thank you.